I'm Kelly Cote, and welcome to week 5 of our 52-week baking challenge, and this starts the 4 weeks of cookies. We're going to be starting off with macarons, which is one of my favorite cookies to bake, and we're going to be talking not just about ingredients today, but also about a few different tools that are really going to make this a lot easier for you. Macarons only have a couple of ingredients, so they're a really easy cookie to make, sort of, because they're technique heavy. So we're going to be talking about different techniques, and again, some of these tools are going to make it easier. First and foremost is a kitchen scale. I cannot stress the importance of this one enough. If you do not have a kitchen scale, borrow one, buy one. You are really going to need one for this recipe. So we've got our scale. Also a piping bag. I buy piping bags like in a giant box off of Amazon. They're great, and they're the ones I can just throw away. You can absolutely buy reusable ones. I'm going to suggest that if you find yourself doing a lot more macarons and other things that require baking, go ahead and get quality. You're going to thank yourself for it. Another one is some sort of template for making your macarons. So that can just be a piece of cardboard that you've drawn circles on, or you can go ahead and purchase a baking sheet like this, and you'll see this one's actually made for macarons. It has small circles and larger circles so that you find that everything, they end up being the same size, which is a lot easier to turn into sandwich cookies, which a macaron technically is. Parchment paper, you're gonna want parchment paper. And that's because if you bake directly onto the Silpat, that's like the rubber or the silicone baking sheets, your macarons are gonna actually pull up, and you're gonna end up with this concave bottom on them, and you don't want that. You want a nice flat with some solid feet around. So a scale, I'm just going through, we got a scale, we have our piping bag, our circle guides, parchment paper. A candy thermometer is going to be a lot of help for you when you're making your Italian meringue. And that's just because I don't personally like having to, we're going to be going to what's called a soft ball stage on our sugar, and a candy thermometer makes the whole process so easy. The one that I use is just CDN. I like it because I can put it specifically on a mode called soft ball stage, and it just beeps and lets me know when it's done. So super easy. You're also going to want the smallest pot that you can find. To put it into perspective, this is what I use when I cook pasta. This is what we're going to be using tonight. So definitely a lot smaller in size. So small pot. And that's pretty much it for tools. So now let's talk a little bit about ingredients. These are just a handful of ingredients. So we've got almond flour. We've got powdered sugar. So the almond flour and the powdered sugar together, this actually forms the dry ingredients, and we'll just add a little bit of salt to that. And then the other thing you need is regular sugar, and we'll add some water to that. And really that's it in terms of ingredients when it comes to making macarons. The one other, and the most important one is the egg whites, right? We've talked about this before, I think it was on week 1 or week 2, that if you're gonna be separating your eggs, which we 100% are, we only use the egg whites in this recipe, you're gonna wanna do that when they're cold. And if you plan ahead in time, you're gonna wanna do this a couple of days in advance. Typically for me though, when I want macarons, I want them now. So like I just separated these, which means that I'm also going to be using meringue powder. If you don't have meringue powder, and of course, why would you? Cream of tartar works just as well. Or you can do, again, what we call is aging your egg whites, which is separating them and then putting them in the fridge for a day or two, covered, obviously. But that would be aging your egg whites. So I think we went over everything, so let's go ahead and start measuring out our ingredients. So I've got my egg whites set aside. That's 4 egg whites. So my 4 egg whites are going to go aside, and here we go. Now I am turning on my scale, and what I'm doing is making sure that it's in grams, and then I'm zeroing it out. So basically what I have right now on top of my scale is a bowl and a sieve, and I'm now just going to put in 165 grams of almond flour. If I can get the darn seal open. They do their job well, right? By protecting the almond flour from moisture. So again, oh, and we didn't talk about it, but right, this is a gluten-free recipe, completely gluten-free. The other thing to keep in mind is that when it comes to flavoring your macarons, it's hard to get flavor into the shell. And the reason is because you can't use anything that has liquid in it, right? So one of the things that you can do, and what I usually do, is I don't flavor my shell at all. And I just put all of the flavor into whatever buttercream or ganache that I'm putting in between. And that's normal, actually. If you were to buy shells, rarely are you going to find a flavored shell. The flavor is all in the filling. However, the exception, and that's what we're going to do today, is a lemon. So you can zest any of your citrus fruits. So you can, I'm just measuring out 165 grams, okay? So we've got 165 grams of almond flour. So you can zest any citrus. So we're gonna be doing lemon tonight. Put the almond flour aside, zero out my scale again, and now we're gonna do 165 grams of powdered sugar. And the reason that I'm doing this over a sieve is that your final product, you definitely do not want it to be lumpy. If there are lumps at all, it's going to bake unevenly, and that is going to be something that you will see really, really easily on a macaron cookie. And you might be wondering, why am I calling them macarons and not macaroons with 2 O's? And that is because macaroons with 2 O's, that's actually a totally different kind of cookie. Those are coconut based. There we go, 165. Macaroons are coconut, egg white, and sugar, whereas macarons are this almond flour concoction that we're doing. So I've got my almond flour and my powdered sugar in the sieve, and and you're gonna see I'm not gonna shake it too much because it makes a little bit of a mess, to be perfectly honest. So I just kind of stir it around. If I shake it, I end up with flour and powdered sugar on my counter, and that's just, what's the point, right? So just getting all these lumps out. You can see there are definitely lumps both in the sugar and in the almond flour. Okay, so we've got our dry ingredient. And you can see that everything we're doing is pretty light in color, right? I mean, the almond flour is light, the sugar is light. Both the sugars, I should say, are light. And a little bit more here. The egg whites are light. So what you're gonna wanna do, or you could absolutely leave them just a natural color. That's totally okay. Or you can add in coloring. And when it comes to adding coloring, there's 2 ways to do it. Absolutely do not go to your grocery store and buy the food coloring that you would put into, like for dyeing Easter eggs or putting on frostings. You can either do powdered, we're definitely gonna do that, or you can do gel-based, and we're gonna do that as well. The gel-based gets you a lot richer color. The powder gives you a more pastel-y color. I personally, though, kind of like what happens when I use both. It gives me, I feel, a slightly more depth to the color. So I'm just breaking open the seal on my powder and gonna sprinkle in. I'm not measuring this out, just putting some in. There we go. All right. And it looks a little orange. However, you can see it is called lemon yellow coloring. So we've got that over. I'm gonna put my gel coloring over by my oven, by my stove, because that's where I'm gonna be using it. So I've now measured out my flour, and let me just put in a pinch of salt to that, okay? And the next step is measuring out my regular sugar. So again, I've got my small pot on my scale, and I'm looking for 150 grams of sugar. And so just pouring this in. I was lucky enough to get to be in Paris at the end of 2019. And while I was there, I ended up taking a macaron making class from an actual French pastry chef. If it had not been for the techniques that she taught us, I don't think, I probably would have tried these once on my own, failed miserably, and then been like, that's it, I'm done, I'm not doing it again. So yeah, because again, it is very technique heavy, but once you've got the techniques down, you're golden, no problems at all. All right, so I've got my bowl of flour mixture off to the side. I'm also going to put in some lemon zest, because as I mentioned, we are going to be making lemon shells. There we go. All right, so I've got my bowl of that to the side. I am next going to bring over my stand mixer. If you don't have a stand mixer, use a regular electric mixer, that's fine, but do not attempt this by hand. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my 4 egg whites into my stand mixer with a balloon whisk attachment. So as you noticed, there's no rising agents. There's no yeast, there's no baking soda, there's no baking powder. All of the rise comes exclusively from the egg whites. So we're going to be turning those egg whites on in just a second, but the one last thing I need to do is my pot of sugar is add a 1/4 cup of water. Just a 1/4 cup of water. All right. And I'm just putting that in. And now the next part of this is the absolute easiest. And that's because it is basically benign neglect. We are not going to touch the sugar. We're not going to touch the egg whites other than putting in a little bit of meringue powder into them. And it's super important that your egg whites don't end up with anything else in them. No water, no egg yolk, no salt. The only thing that you could want to put in them at this stage is, again, this meringue powder or cream of tartar, just to help stiffen it up a little bit. So the next thing I'm going to do is turn my stand mixer on. I'm going to put it at about a level 7 because it's going to be whipping quite a bit. And then the next thing I'm going to do is put my, here we go, thermometer, turning it on. It is already set soft ball at 234 degrees. And what I'm looking for is 230 degrees because that's when I'm going to put in the food coloring. So I'm just going to attach this, clip this on because it clips on just to the back. Here we go, to the back of my pot. Okay, and the trick to making this is, again, to not touch it. You do not want your sugar to crystallize, and that can easily happen. Here we go. You don't want your sugar, as I was saying, you don't want your sugar to crystallize, and that can happen if you stir it because then the sugar and the water go up the sides. So we're just going to set it here on medium high. That's now on a 7. I'm going to turn my stand mixer on at a 7 as well. And the great thing is that my sugar is going to hit its softball stage at the exact same time that this hits stiff peak. So I will see you back here anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes. We'll check the stiff peak though in a bit, and I will show you how to pour in your sugar mixture into the egg whites to get a truly beautiful Italian meringue for our macarons. So I'll see you in a little bit. Okay, it's been a few minutes. My egg whites are still doing great. Of course, you can hear those going. My sugar is now full on boiling. It's now at 220 degrees. Now, the interesting thing about this is that because the different stages of sugar crystallization and caramel from the sugar, it happens as water evaporation goes off. And so it starts to boil, obviously when it hits its boiling point, but what's happening is all the steam that's coming out, that's all the water evaporating out. Remember at the beginning I said that water is our enemy when we're making macarons, and that's what's happening right here is all of the water is leaving this. So I'm looking, right, it's just at 221 degrees, so it really slows down at this point. So don't, it seems to go really, really quickly, and then it's going to stop at a temperature around 215 to 220, and that's normal. You're still going to let it go through. We're still looking for softball stage. Don't try to jump the gun and think that it's going to be good because it's been cooking for a certain amount of time. Wait for it, right? Haven't touched the sugar, haven't touched the egg whites, and all I've got in my hand is my gel-based coloring that I'm going to put a couple of drops into when it hits 230 degrees. After that, we're going to quickly bring it over. Sorry, I'm just going to get this out of the way. We're going to quickly bring our sugar over. And because we're doing an Italian meringue-based macaron, that means I'm going to have the sugar at the lip of it, at the very edge of the bowl of the meringue, and we're going to be slowly drizzling it in. So what it's going to do is it's actually going to end up cooking the egg whites that are being mixed right now. And we're going to pour that in and let it keep mixing until it gets to a stiff peak. And I'm going to show you what that looks like and how to test for it. And I just keep checking my sugar. It's still just 226 degrees. Egg whites are looking good. Okay, I'm happy with it. 227, we're getting closer. I'm like flipping the lid on the food coloring. So as I was talking, right, most of the flavoring you're going to want to put goes into the actual filling of your macaron. We're going to be doing, after this, we're going to do a second video for filling, and I am going to be doing an Italian meringue, lemon meringue, buttercream frosting. So we'll walk you through that. Oh, and there we go, just these. So I'm going to put in 1 giant dollop, 2, 3 giant dollops. Again, I don't stir it. I'm not mixing it up. And it's at 233. You can hear it beeping. It's letting me know it's almost done. I am not touching it though, right? I'm not mixing around. Okay, I've got that turned off. Turn my oven off, and here we go. Stove is off. And I'm just going to start gradually pouring this in slowly down the edge. And it's just a drizzle. And we're getting there. And you can see it's starting to turn the egg whites yellow. I'm going to keep going nice and steady, steady pour. And again, this Italian meringue is my favorite way to make a macaron. You could do a Swiss meringue or a French meringue. I find that the Swiss meringue method, they end up being too crunchy almost, and the French meringue method, they're too soft. So I find that Italian meringue gives me the nice structure that I like inside of my cookie without it being, right, crunchy, crispy, because they shouldn't be, right? These are macaron cookies. All right, I've got all of my sugar out, so I'm just going to put this quickly in water because it makes the cleanup a lot easier. So I've got some, there we go. All right, so the next thing, back to our egg whites. I'm going to turn the speed up, and as I said, we're looking for stiff peaks. And you're going to know that for a couple of ones. First off, if you're using a stand mixer, you can put your hand on the bottom of the bowl. It's hot, right? I mean, we just put in 234 degree crystal sugar in here, right? It's super hot. So that's one thing, is it's gonna start cooling itself off as it mixes and as it aerates. So number one is it'll feel room temperature, if not cool to the touch. The second one is just looking at it. It's gonna start turning shiny. It's gonna become glossy. And then of course the stiff peak itself is the descriptor that we're truly looking for. And so I'll show you how you can test for stiff peaks as we go along. Actually, you know what, for fun, let me show you. I'm going to turn it all the way off, and I'm going to bring it down, and you can see that, like, I lift it up, and it just folds in on itself, right? So that is, I don't even think I would call that a soft peak yet. All right, so we are back on, again, whiskey, and this is why you don't want to have to do this by hand. I cannot imagine how people made macarons before electric mixers came about. All right, and the other thing we're going to need a little bit is just a spatula. We're going to use our spatula for what's called a macaronage stage of the cookies, and that's when we're actually mixing our egg whites in with our flour and powdered sugar, but we'll talk about that when we get there. So I'm just going to, all right, looking at the egg white mixture. You can see that there's little pieces, maybe you can see, little pieces of colorized sugar now, like teeny tiny little dots are being flicked off of the balloon whisk onto the sides of the bowl. Totally okay, but we don't want to get those into our cookie itself. So you don't want to scrape those down, because those are actually like truly almost like a rock candy, right? They're crystallized sugar. And we don't want that crystallized sugar inside the cookie because it'll add a crunch when you're not expecting it. So we're not going to scrape the sides of the bowl on this one at all. Like we do when we're doing cookies, or when we've done our bread loaf, our quick rise bread loaf before, we were scraping down the edges of the bowl. We don't do that when we make macarons. All right, so let me show you again. I'm gonna turn it, I can stop shouting, turn it down, lowering it, and see what happens is I lift it, and see how the peak kind of stays there a little bit more, like it actually lifts up. If you can see that, here, I'm gonna, and the final test, right, so we've got our whisk comes in. Now that still is bending down a little bit, right? So I'm gonna keep going a bit more because it's still not quite firm enough. So let me get it back in and back up, lift it and back on. All right. We're getting really close though. So as I mentioned, we want stiff peaks. A super fun way to test for stiff peaks is if you are baking with children, which this is a fun one. Now obviously with the hot sugar, you don't want them to be touching that, but let your kids pick the coloring that goes in. Let them pick the flavors that you're doing for the filling. It might not be something that you would have chosen for yourself, but they can help you with the decorating of the cookies too if you want to do decorating. But if you've got a kid helping you out, I'll be able to show you in just a second a super fun way to test for stiff peaks. And that is if you get your kid helper. And when I do this with I've done this with my nephews just once or twice, I think. There we go. So I can see like I hold this up and that's not moving, right? That is a stiff peak. So I tell kids, when I use my nephews, I need super brave cook because we're going to test it, and we're testing it by literally putting it over our heads and nothing spills out. That's how we know it's done. So, alrighty. The next step, let's get my mixer out of the way. Okay. I am now going to combine. So I have my flours here and my meringue here, and I'm just coming in, and the goal is to get all of the meringue out of the bowl and into our flour mixture. Now again, don't scrape on this one. You can see there's a little bit of some hardened crystal sugar at the bottom. Do not scrape that into your cookie. We don't want that. So I'm using just a real soft touch with this. Also taking care to not knock out all the air bubbles. All that time that we spent whipping our egg whites is, like I said, the only way that we're getting a rise out of our cookies. So what we're doing now is, it's called a J curve, and you're gonna see I'm gonna go like this with my spatula. So I'm gonna come in, make a J, lift up, and then kind of push down. So I'm not like slamming it against the side. I'm gonna do the same thing. Turn the bowl a bit, J curve. And so what we're doing is getting the meringue to lift up all the pieces of flour. And we definitely want them to be combined. As I said, you don't want any kind of lumps or clumps, because it will make your, instead of having a nice flat surface on the top of your cookie shell, it'll end up like this, or peaks, or you'll just end up with, it just won't look pretty. It'll still taste okay, it just won't look as pretty. And when it comes to macarons, having something that looks pretty, to me, is just as important as having something that tastes good. So again, I'm coming in, coming up, scooping down, and coming around, coming up, down, and around, coming across again the bottom of the bowl. So I'm really getting in there. Okay. And but you can see that we still have quite a bit of this dry flour, right? So we still need to incorporate all of that. And the trick is, again, being relatively gentle, because we, again, can't knock out all those air bubbles. And as I said, this is called the macaronage stage of a macaron. And so if the whole cookie name is macaron, and this is a step that bears the name of the cookie, that should give you an indication of how important this is. Like, this is truly how you make the macaron cookie. So I'm still coming up, and right, we hit another giant pocket of flour in there. And that's normal, right? What we're doing right now is to get all of that out. And I'm just kind of tidying down, okay? And again, now I can see that so there's something called the ribbon test. And so I'll do it right now. It's definitely not there yet, but I want you to see. what I'm doing is I'm lifting up my spatula, and I lift it up. Nothing is coming off of that except for like super slow, right? What we're looking for is for the batter to ribbon off of the spatula. So you're going to keep stirring this, keep doing these J curves until we get to the ribbon stage of our batter. But you can see this gorgeous yellow color, right? And again, I find that I tend to get best results. Oop, I'm seeing some more flour down here at the bottom. I tend to get the best if I use a combination of the powder coloring and the gel coloring. I like the coloring I get from the gel coloring. That's actually my favorite coloring. But in order for me to put enough in so that I get these vibrant, beautiful shades of macarons, it's almost like I can taste something that doesn't quite taste like a cookie, right? And so that's why I like also using the powder. The powder gives me a more pastel color overall, so I don't want to just use that if I'm looking for a bright, vibrant color. All right, so I'm going to lift up my spatula again. It's still not there, but you can at least see it's getting closer. So I lift up my spatula, and it's okay. All right, that's kind of what we're looking for. We just want it to be faster. Another way you can do it is by trying to draw a figure 8 and see how we weren't able to draw a full figure 8, right? So, because it's just not coming off fast enough. So what we're doing is we're slowly thinning out our batter and being as even as possible. So you can see I'm turning my bowl a lot. I'm grabbing everything off the sides that I can. We're coming in along the bottom. I'm actually going to scrape my spoon because I see some inconsistencies there. All right. And we are getting really, really close. Now, you'll find if you read in some cookbooks, they're like, oh, only do 8 turns or do this for no more than a minute. Personally, I mean, everybody's strength is different. Everybody's techniques are different. So I don't suggest that you necessarily stick with a specific number of turns or a certain time of stirring. All right, let's do another test. All right, almost there. I say that you go till the ribbon stage. That's how I was taught, and it has never steered me wrong. I'm gonna clean off my spoon again. Okay, and I'm thinking that we might actually be, we do one more giant turn. Okay, and let's test it. One more. So J and a J, okay, and then let's lift. Okay, so yes, I'm happy with that. All right, so the next step, I'm gonna rinse my hands off because it's sticky, right? It's basically sugar and egg whites. So the trick to filling a piping bag is to take the piping bag here and almost like make a sleeve for your hand to go in, but that still has a hole that's big enough for your spatula to go into. So that's what we're gonna do, is just pick up, and now obviously you want to do this closer to the bowl, but I want you to see how I'm doing it, and then I scrape it off of my thumb that's inside the sleeve. And so again, I come into my bowl, I scoop up, pour into the bag, and then scrape. That was a little messy, so I'm gonna bring it down closer to the bowl. That'll decrease my chances of messing up. And we're just gonna, okay. And you're gonna do this until your entire mixture has been moved into your piping bag. Again, you don't wanna be stirring this as you're getting it out if at all possible. So it's just kind of like a lift and scoop and then scrape, and lift, scoop, scrape. Obviously the larger your spatula, the better in this case, just because you're able to scoop up more at a time. But use what you have at home, right? If you've got a small spatula and nothing else, just use your small spatula and just know it'll take you a few minutes longer. I've also sometimes put my piping bag into like a vase. and let the vase hold it up. That tends to work really, really well. But that is just another, hey, if you've got it, try it, but it's certainly not mandatory. And we are almost done filling our piping bag. All right, so here we go. So the color that we're using, it is, again, purely for aesthetic. It's not flavored. The only flavor we have in these shells is that little bit of lemon zest that I used from a Meyer lemon. If you can get a hold of a Meyer lemon, that is 100% the way to go. The flavor on those, there's just a sweetness to them that you can't really find in a regular lemon. And I'm gonna just over, and again, rinse off my hand because they're sticky. All right, so I can now lift this up, and this is my piping bag. So I'm gonna lay it on my counter, and I can either use a rolling pin at the back of a spoon, or what I'm gonna do is a dough scraper, right? So I'm just gonna push and push and push. And what we're doing is just trying to get the dough out of the top so that we'll be able to hold our piping bag really, really well. So we've got this here, piping bag is done. So the next step is actually piping out our macarons. So the trick on this one is only pipe one tray of cookies at a time. And that's because they need to develop a skin on top. And that happens somewhere between 30 minutes to 60 minutes, depending upon how much humidity is in the air around you. So I'm gonna put my baking sheet with my cookies and, all right. Now you're gonna notice I'm not using a tip, right? I'm just gonna cut this off. You can totally absolutely use a tip if you like using tips. I found that it doesn't make it any better, and it's just one more thing to have to clean up, and I'm not a fan of cleaning. So I'm gonna push, twirl, and we're not squeezing the cookie, right? The piping bag. It's just a push down and then twirl at the end, letting gravity do what it needs to do. All right, and I'm gonna, here we go, down and circle around. In the middle, down and circle around. And that's all you're gonna do is just fill up your sheet. And again, you can see that I'm using the guide underneath the parchment paper so that all of the cookies end up the same size. And I'm just starting in the center and letting it go out. So you're not piping these in like a tubular shape at all, right? It's just in the center. Let the cookie itself form, and then like a counterclockwise twist at the end. And if you find that it's not coming out well at all for you, squeeze it back into your bowl and give it a few more stirs. It means that the batter itself is just a little too stiff. And you can just stir that. The other problem though is if it's coming out and it's almost runny. Unfortunately, there's no fixing that. Still bake them. They will still taste good. They just won't look the way that you would expect a macaron to look. Okay. And I'm just gonna get this under the camera so you can see. And turn. That's actually a wonky one. You can see that it turned it up oval shaped. Again, it tastes fine. And if you're gonna be doing any kind of decorating, you can just tell yourself like, well, that'll just be one that I practice on, because they don't all have to be perfect. Although, of course, I like them all to be perfect. All right, so you can see each sheet that I'm doing right here is gonna have 30 shells, which the sad part is that means it's only 15 cookies, right? Because every cookie requires 2 shells and a filling. Now I am here at the end, okay? So I've got my one sheet, so I'm gonna tip up my piping bag, and I'm now gonna lean it here in the corner of my counter so that it stays out of my way, but we need to make sure that the piping side is up. So what happens next, this is the noisy part, is we're actually gonna slam our baking sheet down onto the countertop, and I have found that if I use a if I use a towel and drop them on top of that. Same result without the super obnoxious loud banging noise. So again, you want to get it a few inches up and then drop it. That's it. So a few inches up and drop it. And what we're doing is getting all of the air bubbles, well, not all of them, but most of the air bubbles that are trapped inside the cookie shell itself up and out. So lift up, drop down, and do this a handful of times. And you can see how the cookies are actually spreading, right? Alrighty. So that is, nope, I can see I've still got a few more pockets in here. So I can keep doing this, or I can grab a toothpick now, and I can come in and actually look for any of the large bubbles at the top and poke them. And that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna just poke them, and you will have noticed, maybe, that I have not yet turned on my oven to preheat it, and it's not a mistake this time. It's on purpose. So what's happening is that, like I said, we're gonna let these develop a skin, and there's just some bubbles. We're gonna let these develop a skin, and we don't want them to go in the oven for at least 30 minutes. And so we're gonna let these sit out. That's also, again, that's why I'm not piping 2 baking sheets at a time. Now you can see I definitely have a few different weird sizes, like super large one, right? Super large one, super tiny one. That's fine, because at the end we're gonna line them all up and just pair off the tallest with the, or the biggest with the biggest and the smallest with the smallest, and we'll have a few different size cookies. So the skin that's on top is super important. Don't rush this stage. Now what's happening is that the skin is gonna form, again, over the course of 30 to 60 minutes. And what it's going to do is that inside of the shells, when we put them in the oven, there is moisture, right? There's moisture in the egg whites. It's gonna try to escape. And if we don't have enough of a skin, it'll escape out the top, and you will end up with without any feet. So when you think about a macaron and you've got your shell, and then down at the bottom, there's like this like ribbony, frilly, just beautiful kind of bubbly looking thing, that's called feet. And that's formed when the moisture, that steam that's escaping, can't go up because of the skin. It has to go out the bottom, and it forms those feet. So that is basically what we're doing right now, is we're gonna prep and we're gonna allow that to happen. So I'll see you back here in half an hour or so, and I'll show you how you can test to see if your skin is formed. So see you in a bit. Okay, so I want to show you, they're not quite ready, but I want to show you what we're looking for, and we're also going to turn on our oven, and we'll talk about that in a second. So clean, dry finger, again, we don't want moisture. Moisture is the enemy of a macaron. I'm going to just touch the top of one of the shells, and you can see nothing, there's like a teeny tiny little dot that came away on my finger in terms of stickiness, but more than that, it felt tacky. It was still, it definitely, like, it didn't have a skin yet, right? So I was able to touch it, and it felt almost like a Scotch tape, you know, where it's sticky, and I can touch it. I can definitely take my finger away from it, but it's tacky. However, it's getting really, really close. So the next step for me is to go ahead and turn on my oven for preheating. Now I'm going to turn it to 200 degrees, and I get that 200 degrees is really, there we go. 200 degrees is really low, right? I mean, like, you don't bake cookies at 200 degrees. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna start off at 200 degrees for 15 minutes. So again, 200 degrees for 15 minutes, we're gonna put in our sheet. And after 15 minutes, we're then gonna turn the temperature up somewhere between 325 degrees and 350. And so what happens is at that low temperature, it's going to allow the heat, the steam to start forming, to actually start lifting up the top of the cookie, start building the feet out without a super shock of heat temperature. So I have found that over time that tends to get me my best cookie. Again, low temperature for 15 minutes at 200 degrees, and then we'll bump it up to somewhere between 325 and 350. You'll find the sweet spot for yourself. And we're gonna do that for anywhere between 11 to 13 minutes, depending upon the size of your cookies. So I've got that, and then of course that ends up being, right, about a half an hour. So the next thing we can do is start piping out our second batch. So I'm gonna go ahead, start piping out my second batch, got a couple of minutes left for the skins to fully form, and so I'll see you back when we are ready to put these in the oven and show you what a true skin feels like. All right, see you in a second. Okay, so my skin has formed, and so I'm gonna go ahead again, clean, dry finger. I'm gonna touch the top of one of my cookies, and nothing came away. I could actually even push down just a little bit on the cookie, and it didn't stick to my finger. So there's definitely that nice dry skin has now been formed. So the last thing to do before you put the oven is think about what your final cookie is gonna be. So what's your filling going to be? And does that require some form of decoration now? So for example, if I were going to be doing a pistachio buttercream, I would possibly at this point take some actual pistachios, crush them up, cut them a little bit, do whatever I wanted, and possibly put a couple of those on the top of my macaron shells, because you would want to do that now, after the skin has formed, but before they go in the oven. I have made espresso buttercream, right? So like a chocolate bottom, a vanilla top, espresso buttercream, so a cappuccino macaron. I would put an espresso bean on the tops of some of them right now. What I'm gonna do for these though, is after they come out of the oven and have cooled, if I choose to decorate them, that's what I'm gonna do it with some white chocolate drizzle and some pretty sprinkles. So I'm not gonna do anything at this point. They're gonna go straight into the oven. And again, let's see here. So that is in, they are now on the middle rack, like as middle of the oven as I can possibly get, and 200 degrees for 15 minutes. And at the end of 15 minutes, all I'm gonna do, I'm not gonna open up the oven, I'm gonna leave it as it is, and all I'm gonna do is just turn the heat up to, for me, about 325 degrees. Oh, and there's my timer going off right now. So 325 degrees is what I'll be looking for, but you'll find your sweet spot somewhere between 325 and 350. So 15 minutes at 200 degrees, and then 11 minutes at 325 degrees, and about a half an hour. I will see you when we take our macarons out of the oven. See you then. Okay, I have just taken my first batch of cookies out of the oven. So what we are gonna do, they are just fresh out of the oven. They're still on the baking sheet. And what I wanna do is get them off the baking sheet as quickly as possible, because that's still hot, right? So that can actually still be cooking the cookies. And yet I don't wanna take them off of the parchment paper yet, because that can actually damage the shell. I want them to cool on the parchment paper. So I'm just gonna lift up the parchment paper on the edges and shift it onto my counter. So let me, and this is always tricky, super careful, and laying it down. Okay, now this is not normal for me, but a couple of the cookies, just because some of them are really large, ended up touching into each other. So I'm just gonna, with my knife, while they're still hot, and again, it's not ideal, but it's, at least it'll work. I'm gonna get them to not be touching, because if I try to separate them after they've cooled, they'll crack, right? So if I can do this when they're still warm, and so what I'm doing is just taking a knife and kind of wiggling it in between the cookies, just the couple that are touching. There we go. So this whole batch that I got tonight, because I made very large shells, ended up only making, let's see, here's 30, 48, 49, 50 shells, so 25 cookies. With that same amount of batter, I have sometimes gotten as many as 90 shells for 45 cookies. So again, smaller piping, bigger piping, completely up to you when it comes to making these shells. But I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna see if I can take up just one right now. And again, they're still cooling, so this is not normally what you'd want to do, but what I want is to show you. Here we go. So yeah, it's you can see, because it is I'm gonna hold it under the camera as well, you can see that it started peeling away from the because it was still wet. So you can see, there we go. But this is what we're talking about. This is called the feet. So here along the edge where there's like that rim that kind of puffs up, this is where the steam, remember where I was talking about the steam escaping? That's called the feet. We've got a nice shell. Here we're gonna listen to this. You can actually hear, right? So that's a nice firm top. You can see across the top of these, there's no crackage, there's no splitting. Again, if that does happen, it can be a couple of different reasons, but it's usually that the skin didn't form quite enough or the temperature was too hot. So if that happens to you in your first batch, don't worry about it. It happens, right? If you have, let's see here, if they spread too much, so mine ended up touching because I just piped them too large. That was my error. If you didn't pipe them too large and they end up really spreading out, it's because your batter was too thin. So next time, just don't stir it so much. But other than that, I'm just gonna let these stay here on the counter. They're gonna fully cool. I do not want to take them again. I don't want to take them off of that parchment paper until they're fully cooled. And I definitely do not want to do any kind of decorating. Best case scenario, I actually let them fully cool and then put them into a container, an airtight container, and let them overnight, just kind of finish fully drying, fully cooling before I do any sort of decorating or piping. But that's how you make a macaron shell. So we're pretty much done at this point. So happy baking, and come on back because we are gonna do a filling. And I'll be honest, I'm thinking in my head, I might not do an Italian lemon meringue filling at this point. I might just do an American buttercream lemon meringue filling instead. We'll see. Right, this is just thinking this one through. What do I want to do, and is it really worth it? It might be. I'll have to give it some thought. Anyway, come on back, so we'll do the filling, and we're gonna do a buttercream of some kind, not a ganache. So I will see you in a little bit when we are ready for our filling. All right, see you then. Okay, I'm about to make the filling for my macarons. Executive decision, I'm going as absolutely as easy as I can. It is after 11 o'clock at night. I'll be honest, I'm getting not tired, but not in the mood to do like an hour buttercream meringue, Italian meringue style. So we're gonna stick with a basic American meringue. Now, I'm not gonna be using a specific recipe tonight just because I am gonna be trying out some flavors that I've never done before, so this will be a test for me. However, if you are looking for an American buttercream recipe, it's basically 1 stick of room temperature butter for 2 cups of powdered sugar with 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and then 1 to 2 tablespoons of heavy whipping cream, the liquid. So again, that's 1 stick of butter, 2 cups of powdered sugar, a teaspoon of vanilla, and 1 to 2 tablespoons of liquid whipping cream if you're going with just a plain vanilla. And that is a great base, so start with that. However, what I want to do tonight is truly make like a lemon kind of cookie. So what I'm going to be dealing with is some butter. So let me go ahead and unwrap my room temperature butter. Now I'm going to start with just 1 stick. And as I said, I'm not going to really be using a recipe. Most of the frostings that I do these days don't have a recipe. It's just kind of to taste, right? So play around with flavors. This is where you can really have some fun. So I've got a stick of butter. I've also got some some lemon curd that I'm going to be using. So this is, and you can, I mean, of course you can make your own lemon curd. I am just not feeling that adventurous tonight. So I'm just going to, and of course I chose a spatula that is way too large to fit in that jar. So let me grab a smaller one. Here we go. All right, so I'm gonna put in some lemon curd. And because I'm putting in lemon curd, I am not gonna be putting in any liquid. I'm just gonna start with that amount. And then I'm going to raise up my stand mixer, and on a super low speed, because I'm gonna just start pouring in powdered sugar. I'm gonna start pouring in powdered sugar, right? Like I said, I'm not using a recipe. This is just a taste. I'm not totally sure how much powdered sugar I put in, but I feel happy with it so far. And I'm just gonna let it kind of, but as I was saying, this is where you can have fun. So as much as like baking itself is truly chemistry, it's science, like there's so much of the why behind what we do. When it comes to buttercream fillings, sky's the limit, right? So just have fun with flavors, try out different things. I was on a kick with like cocktail flavored buttercreams lately, doing like lime margaritas, strawberry margaritas, limoncellos, different kinds of things like that. And you can see already it's really incorporating the powdered sugar into the butter and the lemon curd. And so really what I'm ultimately looking for is a fluffiness to it that I definitely am not seeing yet. I wouldn't expect to. But I'm going to go ahead and put in some more lemon curd just for some softening that up a bit. Now if I have to, I do have a second stick of butter ready to go. And then I also brought out some, it's an Amaretti is the company who makes it, but it's their lemon drop martini mix. This is the base that you use for a lemon drop martini. So if as I'm tasting it, if I'm like, you know what, it's just not as lemony as I want it to be, I'm gonna put in a little bit of this, but of course because that's a liquid, it means I'll also be putting in more powdered sugar. And so just making sure that everything balances itself out over time. Okay, let's go ahead. I'm going to bump it up a notch or two. And I'm going to go grab a couple of spoons because I am going to be doing some taste testing on this. I'm just looking at it. And a lot of, right, and ooh. Oh, it smells good. It smells lemony, so that's what I was hoping for. All right, so what I'm going to do is turn this off, lower it down, and I'm just going to put in a spoon. Okay, so that's good. I like the flavor. It's a little thick though, so I am gonna put in some Amaretti. And when I say thick, it's like it's like it's just powdered sugar that's been flavored, right? So it's not what I would want it to be in terms of lightness. So I'm just gonna put in, let me do this, turn it back on, and I'm just gonna drizzle in a little bit of my liquid. All right, and again, you can always add more, you can never take away, right? So I just put in a super teeny tiny amount, and I'm gonna bump it up again, another notch or two, let it whip around. So again, I'm using a stand mixer, obviously, and I'm using a paddle that has like spatula sides to it, so it really scrapes the edges. I found that works better than the regular paddle that came with my stand mixer. I'm liking what I'm seeing. All right, let's turn it down. Let's go ahead and scrape down the edges because I do see little bits of powdered sugar, lemon curd on the edges. I'm gonna scrape it against the paddle. Scrape the paddle itself. Right. Okay, and let's test it out, see how the flavor is. All right, clean spoon. And it's getting there. Anyway, I'm gonna keep playing around with this. You have fun with your frosting. Try some flavors. Again, instead of putting in whipping cream, I've definitely, like I said earlier, I put in just like a shot of espresso, right? You get your coffee flavored. When I've done that though, I've also put in some of the Starbucks Via crystals, just for like a little extra pumping up the flavor without having to add an extra liquid. You can be putting in, I mean, like really anything. You could put in dried strawberries at this point, whatever flavors, whatever you're looking for. Just have fun with your buttercream. And we'll come back in a little bit because we're going to be filling up a piping bag just like we did for the macaron shells. We're going to be piping up our buttercream into those shells. All right, so I will see you in a bit. Okay, we are back, and it is one of my favorite parts because it's the decorating. It means that the cookies are done. So just to give you an example, remember that one that I peeled off the parchment paper way too early just to show you, and it looked like that, like just all icky and crumbly, right? So to give you a perspective, here's one that I let fully cool on the parchment paper. And right, massive difference, right? Exact same sheet, exact same amount of time of baking, and all I did was I took this one off too early. All right, so the next thing I did is I went ahead and I just got all of my, and again, when they're cool, they just peel right off. So I went ahead and I stacked up a bunch of sizes so that I've got, these ones with these ones. And what I'm gonna do next is we're gonna fill a couple with just buttercream with no decorating. And then I'm gonna do some milked white chocolate and some sprinkles on some so you can see a nice, super easy, but it looks really elegant way for decorating. So for buttercream, we went ahead, we made our buttercream earlier. I piped it, or rather I put it into a piping bag using the exact same method as I did for the macarons, right? Which was the turning it into a sleeve and then spatula in, scrape out. I'm gonna cut off a bit of the end here, and let's just cut right about there. And again, the same thing with macarons. You can absolutely use a piping tip if you wanted to have some fancy ridges, anything looking really nice inside for your frosting. I'm not doing that. I've done it before. It looks beautiful, but it's not something that I feel the need to do all the time. All right, so I've got my piping bag in one hand. I've got one macaron shell in the other, and I'm going to just start in the middle and just huge dollop and kind of swirling it around. Set this down and sandwich them together, and there we go. Lemon meringue macaron. All right, so let's do a few more of those with no decorating, just the buttercream. So again, that's in the middle, swirling around the edge. Put the lid on, and there we go, cookie done. Now let's talk about doing a little bit more decorating, right? So I'm gonna set my buttercream frosting off to the side for now. So I did my melted chocolate. If you want a quick and easy way to melt chocolate, go ahead and take a look at one of my how-to videos I made, but I just put it into, instead of a piping bag, Ziploc bag, right? Nice and easy. But the same technique where I'm just gonna take my scissors and I'm gonna snip off the bottom. But before I do that, because you can decorate a lot of these at once, I'm gonna take the lids of my shells and I'm gonna line them up a little closer in because this can get a scotch messy. And so I'm just taking the lids, and I am just using, again, a clean sheet of parchment paper on my countertop. And there we go, okay. So I'm now gonna just snip off a very small tip from my Ziploc bag. And I'm gonna use my scraper again, right? My bread dough scraper comes in very handy when it comes to decorating. So I now have a Ziploc, and I'm just gonna kind of run my hand back and forth. And again, let gravity do its job. And I can do some with zigzags across. I can do some where it's just on half of the cookie. But you can see that as I'm swirling the chocolate, I am letting it go over the edge of the cookie, right? Let me try some swirls. Yeah, I don't really like that circle. All right, so we're gonna just stick with our straight lines. I like that better. And what I'm doing here is obviously, yes, adding some flavor, white chocolate, but more importantly than that, I'm making a base so that I can put some sprinkles on and that they'll stick. If you put sprinkles on before you put them in the oven, you will have some very fun results in terms of like exploding cookies. So I'm just taking some white sprinkles, some nice little crystal sprinkles, and I'm just gonna put them on, and I'm just using my fingers so that I get the amount that I feel is appropriate. And again, this is 100% to your tastes and your specifications. At the winter holidays, I made some Christmas ones and some Hanukkah ones, and I got some special sprinkles that were specific for the holidays. And I actually got some food tweezers and went through the sprinkle sets and like separated like small blue ones, small white snowflakes. That I felt that was warranted because it was holidays and holidays are special. I'm not doing that today, right? I'm just going in and having some fun. Oh, and so now I'm putting in some nice kind of golden color. Same sprinkle as the white ones, just with some color in there. And I just think it's pretty, right? I mean, that's all we're looking for right now is decoration. These are just sugar sprinkles, so it's not like it's adding any flavor to the macaron at all. It is 100% for aesthetic purposes. Okay, and let's see here. In here, I also have some, there we go. There's some white and gold balls. Now, these are a little bit larger, so I'm not gonna put these on in quite the willy-nilly fashion that I did with the smaller sprinkles. I'm just gonna put a couple on each. But again, same thing. There's no flavor in these sprinkles. They're just for decoration. And I'm just gonna put a couple in, making them look fancy, right? Who doesn't love a fancy cookie that also tastes great? So again, that's where you can have fun with the buttercream. You can really experiment, play around with flavors. You can play around with the decorating on here. I honestly don't think that you could go wrong with decorating. Like whatever floats your boat, go for it. And even if that means no decorating, most of the macarons I make, I don't decorate. Because they taste great. The decoration is almost exclusively for aesthetic purposes, right? Anyway, so there we go. When the white chocolate on here hardens, all I will do, and I'm going to take it off now, like that. There we go. And that's so that it doesn't harden in a straight line and that I end up breaking it. So I'm just going to swirl it, take it off, okay? And I will go ahead and match these up with the other halves of the shells that I have for them, but I will fill them up with the buttercream frosting the exact same way that we did with the ones that don't have any decoration on them. So nothing different on that. It's just a matter of waiting for the white chocolate to dry before we do that, because as you can see, it's a bit of a goopy mess right now, right? All right, so, okay, but that is it. You know what though? That's not it. I take it back. I have not eaten one of these macarons yet, and as we know, eating one is part of the joy, but it's also the test before you serve them to anybody else. So I'm going to take one of the undecorated ones. Oh, it does smell really good. Oh, that is awesome. It really does taste like a lemon meringue pie. It's exactly what I was hoping for. Well, hopefully my coworkers tomorrow enjoy these just as much as I did. But more importantly, I cannot wait to see how your meringues come out. So in the comments below, let me know what flavors you ended up doing. If you had any issues, post them there. I can try to help you troubleshoot them. But other than that, thank you for joining me. Happy baking, and I will see you next week for week 6 of our 52-week baking challenge.